to them. It goes back to the same theory that measuring performance of banners by click-through. It's flawed, it's wrong, but it's the first thing that becomes available for people to leverage, so they leverage it. And I think likes is the same thing. Likes is a diagnostic. It's an interesting thing to capture, but it's not something to measure the ROI of a campaign around. It's about how there's, what is the incremental uplift in revenue that people who have liked your page deliver versus those that haven't, for example.
So John, you're working a lot on this.
Yeah, I mean, look, unfortunately, we who have been in the agency business do a disservice to ourselves because, I mean, a lot of this stuff is just what's going to make me look good.
Well, you're being honest
I'm
now.
sorry. I can say it. I'm not in the business now, but that's the conversation. And it's not to the agency. It's the client, too. It's like, hey, they got a lot of likes. I got to get more so I can show I did something good. They know it doesn't matter. They know it, okay? So we got to get to the important stuff. So, and I think one of my issues with the metrics and the KPIs, I agree with you, is that they're generic. They're non-strategic. So, I mean, to me, if you go back to the root of what a brand is and what a company is, it's finding its uniqueness, which really means they're in a different business than anyone else. The key to the whole thing is to be a category of one. And if you're really a category of one, your metrics can't be the same as everyone else in the industry. What is it? How do you make money that's different than everybody else? Is it because consumers love you and they buy more stuff and tell it? What is it? Okay, and everything should come out of that strategic high ground that can't be copied. And then the metric should be customized as the strategy, and they should lead to competitive advantage. It's very, very generic the way it's done right now and very low level, and that's what leads to all of this sort of tactical stuff.
I think one of the biggest points of confusion that typically come about are when people confuse KPIs with actual objectives or goals.
Yes. Right.
And they are not one and the same. One is indicative of what you're trying to achieve versus the other. And more often than not, what we try to do is we do KPI correlations back to the actual goal. That way, it is nuanced, and you're not looking at the same KPI for each individual client because, honestly, their businesses are different. You shouldn't be looking at click-throughs or impressions or social likes for everyone across the board if it's not indicative of whether or not it's going to achieve your result.
Just to explain, in case anyone out there doesn't know, a KPI is a key performance indicator, which is a metric that could be modeled, tracked, and measured against an outcome or performance. Dylan, huge is in the experience design business when you come right down to it, but you use a lot of data like this to help your designers figure out how to create customer experiences. So how are you filtering those KPIs in your organization?
Well, I mean, it's a complicated process, and I think what you described is what people should be doing, but it's actually a very difficult task to go and define high-level KPIs that drive real, like business objectives. And it's also really hard to come up with a KPI that people understand, which is why I think people fall back on things like likes and click-through rate, because it's an action people understand, and to your point, it's easy to drive that that metric, and you can actually make yourself look good, right? Yeah. But I think for us, we tend to try to take the high-level approach and look at the overall objective and define KPIs and try not to limit ourselves to the tools that are available or the data that's available, because I think to your point, that's what people do. It's either the data's there or they don't have the right tools, so they define their KPI based on what they can.
So give an example, and don't show anything proprietary from one of your clients, but give an example of a non-conventional metric you would look at to measure something.
Well, I think for example, if you're doing a site redesign, a lot of people will lean on the web analytics that they have available, but the web analytics that you have, what they can measure doesn't always help you track back to what is the ultimate business goal. So you have to dig in and kind of work with a lot of teams at the client and with the business to get the data that you need from the business to sort of to blend that. And I think a lot of people stop at what tool they have access to when they're doing something like that, and they just say, this is what we can measure, and these are the KPIs we're going to use to measure success, but they really should go much further than that.
I think one of the things that, and hopefully this isn't proprietary because our client talked about it a little earlier, is finding those metrics. So McCormick is a client that we work with, and everybody saw, Jen up here earlier, and we were really focused on figuring out how to drive their business and really understanding how recipe views and how the components of the recipes were driving changes in their business, which goes all the way back to potentially supply chain issues, right? Because McCormick is an end-to-end manufacturer of spices. They start from the field and get it all the way to the store. So one of the changes that I hope that the industry considers, and I think the people in this room would be the ones that would try to do that, is how do you not consider KPIs and those metrics as necessarily offshoots of programs, but how do you design programs around what is that key strategic piece of information that is going to be the thing that drives your business forward. So for example, it might be something which I won't mention for McCormick, but it could be something as simple as a Nike Fuel Band piece of data. And so it's really flipping.
A little cross-client selling.
Cross-client selling, yeah. No, but it's really flipping that data discussion on its head to say, what are those things that we don't know that would change our business if we did know them, and then design programs to generate that data for you as opposed to just measuring it.
And it's bringing it to the forefront of the conversation, right? I mean, you sit there in a room with a client, you find out what their objective is. The next thing you should be talking about is how you can measure that objective. I think too many times agencies wait until the last minute before something's about to be deployed, and at that point they're staring at a new creative and they're thinking, well, we'll just track how many people click on this button. It needs to be at the forefront of the conversation so then it can drive everything that's done after that point. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. In terms of a strategic approach, one of the things that is more often than not lacking is an actual coherent measurement plan in terms of how to actually determine success. How do you know when you've gotten there? That sort of thing. And more importantly at times, what are you planning on learning as you get there?
One other thing with the measurement plan, and I think this is something that a lot of people don't do, is iterate on that measurement plan, because up front you create your KPIs and you put the best KPIs together that you think will measure success, but then they don't go and actually audit that at the end of like a full cycle and decide, was this correct to measure against? Did it actually lead towards the ultimate business objective? And I think people don't iterate and kind of process their KPIs because it's sort of going back and saying we were wrong, and people want to avoid doing that.
Right. And also, can we stop using ROI when we don't mean it? Okay. I'm sorry. ROI has become anything you can, no one even knows what the letters stand for, half the people that use it. And look, ROI, unless it's something Wall Street values and the CFO and the CEO, it's not ROI, okay? Don't say it is. And, the other thing is to look, now that I've been out of the agency thing, I notice you deal with Wall Street people and the board. There's a language that they use that's the language of the real world, sure, which we're not in. And you've got to explain it. And, it's like I have a company I had some involvement with, and I said, look, we could acquire customers cheaper than we can do acquisitions to get the same number of customers. Oh, really? They understand that. It's up to us to translate the stuff into language that they value and metrics that are important to them. And even the CMO, you can't count on them. They get fired every year and a half. There's a reason for that. We got to help them because they're trying to play at the grown-up table. And now, it used to be they were above the CFO. They're way below the CFO. They're at the grown-up table. And we've got to get to that table. And we can't do it the way we've been doing it.
All right, so let me flip that around and challenge you and actually say something very politically incorrect, which is, aren't the clients a problem sometimes too? And in the sense that, it's unusual that you have clients like McCormick or Nike that really consider their agencies a brand partner, and I'm sorry, I know there are a lot of clients in the room here, but my question is, A, are they communicating and rewarding the agencies based on the actual outcomes that they want to achieve, or are they doing it based on something like in media buying GRPs or in advertising brand awareness or consideration when they really want sales or whatever the metric is? And two, are they even sharing the data with you because they're so guarded about their business models that they don't really trust you?
Well, I mean, that's why at Essence we shy away from those performance-based type deals, because it's incredibly hard for the client to be able to align the marketer's performance exactly with their bottom line. You know, that's our job to help them. Too often at the start of an engagement, you talk to a client, you know, and they want to talk about perhaps, you know, remunerating based on a % of media spend. I don't want to be, you know, rewarded in that way necessarily, because all that does is drive a behavior that we're going to spend more money, and that might not be driving proper value. And I think, you know, clients, you know, as agencies, I think you're right. We have to help clients. We have to help the CFOs make sure that the CMOs make sure that they're making the right decision. So, you know, and I think clients are starting to trust their agencies more and more in terms of giving them that first-party data that really helps them understand whether what they're doing is driving real value. You know, and that's when you can start talking about ROI if you're getting profit level data from your client, and that's what, you know, I'm sure, well, all agencies should be striving to do.
Within econometric modeling, I think one of the best things about the practice is that it actually does engage you at a much higher level, specifically with ROIs that are true ROIs, because you're actually looking at all of the data at that point. It gives you a lot more access in terms of the information that they're willing to share, number one, but it also elevates the conversation overall, because you're talking about things external to perhaps advertising or marketing in that stage, where you can actually start to identify the other areas that may influence that aren't necessarily within your client's mandate nor yours.
So Sue's such a good analyst, she wanted to look at the panel description to realize that I wasn't actually delivering on the other part of this conversation, which is, you know, really how are agencies organized and structured, and how are you training and recruiting the talent you need to achieve this, and what type of person is that? Are they more of a math whiz or more of a marketing or a creative mindset? So why don't you talk a little bit about the talent pool now? How do you do it? And, you know, as we heard earlier today here, you know, quants are the new sexy job in the business. You're not competing in a vacuum. One time it was easy to get geeks, and now it's not.
Depends what rocks you look under. You know, I think, you know, this theory that analytical people must have a background of either economics or sciences or mathematics means that you are going after the same people that want the jobs on Wall Street. The fact is, analytical ability can come from all walks of life and past experiences. So we try not to, when we're recruiting, you know, we don't look to pick particular types of people. We bring them all in. We have a rigorous recruitment process that unearths their analytical ability.
Why don't you talk about Essence's recruiting process and like this 200-page questionnaire you make people go through and that?
It's not a 200-page questionnaire. I don't know where you got that impression from, but it is very rigorous. You know, so throughout the recruitment process, not only do we try and hit on, you know, behavioral questions, but we're also testing a person's analytical ability, their dexterity in numbers, whether they can problem solve when numbers are put in front of them. So we do a lot of case studies, which, yes, involve a calculator, which is very foreign to a lot of people in this industry, right? But framed in the right way and done in the right way, you find some great talent. And they actually, the ones that you want to hire come out of that interview and they're like, that was really refreshing that people are testing me in this way. So yeah, we have a rigorous recruitment process. It means that we, well, the management team end up doing a lot of interviews, because I must be honest, you know, we have a pretty low acceptance rate, but at the same time, the people that then come in the door, we know can do the job for us. And you know, not only analytically strong, but they're also the people that can come up with the next big idea as well. And you know, there's not that many of those around, and that's why it takes a while to find it.
Any of you use slide rules? So there was the guy I was sitting next to in the audience works for a pretty big marketer in the education field, and he said he's their data scientist. And I asked him what his background was, and he says he studied art history and philosophy. So I think that proves your point, right? So is that we've replaced the Renaissance creative thinker with the Renaissance mathematician?
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that we look for has predominantly been less about the specific expertise, because the expectation is that a lot of people are going to understand these complex scenarios. What we typically look for is making people with the ability to make those complex scenarios simple. We work in a communications industry. If you know it, fantastic, have at it, that's good for you. But if you can't explain it to everyone else in that room, then you're not going to do very well.
Yeah, I mean, I see why the process that you go through, Tate, like you find very few people who could do that. I think there was an MIT article on this, on finding those people, and they referred to them as unicorns because they're very rare. And so I think what we do is identify that there are very varying types. So the person that you described who's analytical and can present that data and make it understandable is very rare. But some people can be stronger in quantitative skills, and so we try to structure the team so that they're strong as a team, and we're not always going to be able to find that one individual who has both. Yeah, it's very difficult to do, so we try to structure the team so that the team as a whole is strong.
So talk about the challenge of recruiting, because you're competing with Wall Street and McKinsey and all these big organizations that probably have a little more financial clout, but what do you sell to attract the talent on Madison Avenue? I mean, thankfully we have madmen like role models who make the business look sexy, but then you leave, so how do you recruit them?
Just a little bit of background on me. I went to MIT actually to get my MBA, and out of my class of 350 students, there are 4 of us that work in marketing and advertising. So it is incredibly hard to actually get people that actually could talk to the CFO potentially and understand the business implications to join the industry. But I think one of the even bigger challenges is that it's not that we're competing against McKinsey. It's that we're not even marketing our own industry particularly well. And so you can't go into a place where you could recruit some of this great talent. The thing that attracted me to the industry originally was I thought it was really cool. I didn't need to make a lot of money. I had an extremely successful husband, and it works. And the other thing that it was sold to me as something with a lot of work-life balance. That really hasn't worked out very well. So.
I'll answer this too. Despite the fact that I have a liberal arts background, I'm going to give you a mathematical answer. I think the problem is the delta in compensation in the business. Okay, so which goes back to we haven't gotten real ROI that's consistent that we can prove. Okay, so if you go back to every business where they have real ROI, there's a huge spread between the people making a lot of money and not a lot of money, and so it attracts talent because they're the stars, right? As I always say, if everyone was a character actor, then no one would bother to be a waiter to try to get into the Hollywood scene, right? No one would do it, it's not worth it. So because the procurement people can't measure the output, they measure the cost, and that commoditizes everybody and puts everybody close together. So the stars can't get paid, okay? So there's no incentive. So there's no delta, and you can't get talent. So it all goes back to the very beginning, which is if you could show the CEO that the stock went up and he got his $30 million options package at the end of the year because his bonus is tied to the stock, you will get paid and you will get good talent. When you can't do those sorts of things, then it's hopeless.
So Sue, this gizmo here, your agency helped design it. Do your analysts, do you get a cut of that?
I actually wish. Since RGA has been working with Nike and helping them push their sort of innovation platform and expanding through kind of functional integration, they're offering to add value to their customer base. The brand has changed. Their relationship with consumers have changed. Their financial situation has improved. So I honestly wish that had been the case. But it's really, again, it's really hard to prove that relationship. And even when you can prove it, it's hard for only. It's like somebody like an agency to take a credit for it, because in general we only help clients with a piece of their business, not the entire marketing portfolio of their business even. So it's really hard to take credit for some of the stuff that you'd just love to take credit for.
So Richard, is it easier then for you to go out and find those philosophy majors who can think analytically and train them on the math than it is to recruit someone like Sue from MIT? And is that more of where agencies are going now?
I'm not saying that the strategy should be to go after the philosophist. The strategy is to wait and see what, to proactively engage an audience and don't filter them based on their experiences, right? So you do pick up the MIT grad, but you also pick up some philosophers as well. And, I don't think we shouldn't knock ourselves too hard. I work with fantastic people that challenge me every day and are extremely bright. There is plenty of talent out there for us, and a lot of industries are in worse situations than we are, right? We're not getting the investment bankers, but they don't have a passion for marketing, so why would I want them? It means that perhaps we have less people banging down a door, but the people that are banging down a door, there's a great crop within them.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'll open it to questions from the audience. But this is my favorite question because, you don't just compete with Wall Street or Accenture or McKinsey or all the other talent pools. You're also competing with machines increasingly. And by that, I mean a lot of what's going on here is replacing human functionality by machine processing, because when we're dealing with real-time data, an algorithm can move a lot faster than a human being. We did a story the other day on one of the major tech providers who actually created an algorithm marketplace. Now you can go in and buy off-the-shelf algorithms, and so it almost seems like we've gone beyond math. We're just down to code. What do you think? Are we getting too machine-based, and what do we do about that?
Well, machines can optimize what we come up with, but they can't create things that aren't already being in the set. So so we have to be good to do that, though. It means the people who are the rote stuff is commoditized.
And going back to John's point earlier, the great work that agencies are doing is when they take a custom approach for their clients. And it's not about going out onto the market and pulling down an algorithm that's worked for another 20 people. It's working with those clients to identify what is the correct algorithm for their business. And a machine can't do that. That's human. It's human programmed. It's then applied to a machine that makes their job even better.
I think the virtue of analytics is actually one and the same with automation, because the automation, it should be developed more in actuality, because it should be easier. And the things that, for instance, like dashboarding or reporting and things of that nature that are just simple, absolutely automate that. But invariably, there are questions that come out of the answers that you're seeing in those relative dashboards. And that's when you really need the analysis and to dig deeper. So it will always be there for a human element in order to dig further in. But the automation, honestly, that is a no-brainer. We should absolutely be running down that path.
Yeah, it just sort of brings everything to a more sophisticated level. I think, for example, most of the ad buying platforms or algorithms that are out there, they still have teams of data scientists who understand the inputs and process that data so that the ads are better targeted. It doesn't mean that it's eliminating like some human element of it, because they still guide that entire process.
Which, by the way, is helping us get that best talent, right? Because it's not about them sitting at a desk looking at a dashboard that tells them which has the highest conversion rate. They're actually running really, deep analysis. They're looking into, frequency and saturation of partners and incremental uplift and attitudinal studies off the back of branding campaigns. That's the interesting stuff. And if you can sell people on that, then you can get the talent.
So, and I promise I'll open it up right now, but I just want to do a follow-up there, which is the biggest problem I'm having with dealing with the concept of real-time analytics, is there really is no such thing as real-time. There's machine time, and there's human time. There's all these temporal references, but the reality is people can't think as fast as machines can process, but it's the people who are, as you said, setting up the parameters the machines run by, or checking that the machines are delivering on it. How does that all reconcile? I mean, is it kind of, I think of it as, right now, as being incredibly asynchronous, which is you run, you stop, you correct. Is that the way it's working now?
I think the concept of real time is relative, particularly when you're talking about marketing. There's so many changes you can actually make when you're talking about marketing, whether it be creative changes, media selections, or otherwise. The amount of data that we get in, it can be second by second, certainly, but we don't necessarily want to move second by second in terms of the actions that we take on behalf of our clients. And I think that's where the critical point is yes, we can gain these learnings, but for what purpose? The actionability has to be there. Otherwise, it's kind of data for data's sake.
Okay. Well, do we have any questions from the audience? Comments, observations, pissed off clients?
Sorry, Jen.
So, going back to the talent pool and what type of people you're looking for, so I think the ability to communicate has always been an essential component of this business. So it was said earlier that it's not just having people understand the outputs and the outcomes and are able to analyze them, but being able to communicate them back to the CMO or the CFO or whoever you're dealing with, or the creative group. What do you do to make sure that your groups can market?
One of the things that we just did at RGA is that I took my entire 50-person department offline for 2 days and did intensive training on how to build a story and how to tell a story and how to tell stories with less numbers instead of more numbers. And so you almost have to invest as much, if not often more time, in training people, not just how to analyze things, but how to tell the story. And again, it's finding the people that have the capability to do both, but they don't necessarily, have the practice of doing both. And so it's giving them the training and then giving them the opportunity to practice that and hone that skill.
I still think it's a range of talent. If you hire a stat person, they're going to be able to understand data and they're going to present that data in a very straightforward manner. They're going to put it in a bar chart or a line chart or how they were trained to do it. But when you hire someone with an analytical background who also has a marketing background, but they might not have that hardcore stats or quant background, but they can understand the data, when those two people work together, that's when you get something like that's when you get something that the client really, really likes, because you're able to do the hard work with the data, and then you have someone who can understand that and work with that person and present it in a way, and also almost be like an editor for that. So to your point, presenting more numbers is not always the best solution, and you have to have multiple types of people, because it's just very rare that you find someone who can do all those things.
So John, are quants really the rock stars now? Or is it a hotter job to have than being a great copywriter or art director?
Well, I think it's creative people. And I think quants the really good ones are creative people. And you know what? Because you're a copywriter doesn't mean you're really a creative person. So it's a lot of just, positioning. But I find a lot of similarities between people that are really good. Doesn't matter what they're doing. All the things that you guys have been saying about, thinking outside the box, being able to conceptualize and tell a story, being able to translate from one language to another. Einstein was able to explain, his thinking in really simple terms. And I just think that's the hallmark of the kind of people we need more of in the business and always have.
So I'm getting the impression, just to kind of sum this up and come to some kind of consensus here, that really this new model is a lot like the old model, which is that what makes agencies and marketing and creative and advertising so special is when you have an amalgamation of brains and mindsets who can come together with art and science. I took a tour of Huge's office a couple of years ago, and I think a lot of agencies are structured this way, but took the page out of the old Doyle Dane Bernbach copywriter art director with two people sitting across from each other, but now it's an experienced designer and an analyst or technical data person. Is that really the model now? Have the quant and the designer replace the copywriter art director?
I think it's a combination of all of those four people.
Okay.
And depending, the balance at which they're involved depends on the client brief and the objectives of that brief.
But it shows the need for collaborative personalities. because a lot of people are really good, but they can't interact with any of these other people. So no one ever listens to what they say. And the iterative process of going back and forth is really more important than the copywriter or art director. It's that iteration that makes something come out really good.
Okay, so last question. Where do you think we need to go as an industry? What's going to be next? Are we going to have AI at some point coming up with the big ideas? Scrotal implants? Okay.
I can't see artificial intelligence anytime soon. You know, there's so many reasons why that wouldn't work. I mean, if it did, great. You know, I'm sure we'd use it as a way to, you know, embed it in our approach, and it means that the humans can get on with focusing on even cooler stuff. But no, I think.
Not artificial intelligence, but predictive. A lot of the stuff that Google is doing, their newer products like Google Now, where they predict your next question. I think that's where we're going to have to go versus just this static reporting process. Or like, even dashboards now are pretty outdated. You still have to interact with it and know what you're looking for to get the information that you need. But basically, guided and predictive sort of analytics, I think, is going to be really important in the next few years.
Well, that was a typically human response. I didn't expect anything else. I think we have no more time, but I want to thank our panel for explaining kind of the state of where we are on this kind of marketing versus math challenge. And I'd like to come back and talk to some of your machines next year. So thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Speaking of machines, one of the things that that the last 3 years of data-driven marketing has created is a new machine, yet another set of layers that needs to be interpreted, protected, scrubbed, integrated by yet another layer of technology to create a new morass, a new chart of companies and startups, a dizzying array that are that very often are cold calling just about all of you every week. Understanding where, if any, value is being added in that new supply chain.